Hi folks, I'm bringing this to you from a spot I sat this morning. I want to tell you this story, it's really important, and I want to play you a clip of a BBC interview that I did from this spot, from this chair this morning. Now this is a hard story to tell. I only want to tell you part of it, and there'll be much more to follow, but I regard this as enormously significant. I was greatly disturbed during the night because of what has been happening to Kate Forbes. Now, for those of you who don't know, Kate Forbes is a young woman, 32 years old, married last year with a 6-month-old child, on maternity leave. She's the Scottish Finance Minister, and she came back after the resignation of Nicola Sturgeon to run to be First Minister. She's by far the strongest candidate, the most competent, the most intelligent, as Sturgeon herself acknowledged. But, most of her main rivals dropped out. The biggest rival at the moment appears to be Humza Yousaf, who is the Health Minister and who's been responsible for 3 failed ministries so far. He's also responsible for the Scottish Hate Crimes Bill, which is particularly significant. Now, the trouble with Kate is this. She's intelligent, she's articulate, she is liked by the business community, she's liked by basically everyone she meets. But she's a Christian. And I don't mean a pretend Christian, I don't mean I'm a Christian but it doesn't affect my politics and all that kind of stuff. I mean a Christian who really believes and whose priority has become, the poor. She wants to help the poor and she wants to use her position. Why would anyone else in their right mind come back from maternity leave to face the kind of bear pit that is Scottish politics? But never mind that she's the most competent candidate. The establishment within the SNP, as Alex Salmond has pointed out, has decided we have to get Kate, and it's been unrelentless. The National, the SNP newspaper, I was doing an article a day. Last night it was an article an hour against Kate Forbes, and there's been this absolutely hit job with the connivance of the media, to be honest, who ask her gotcha questions. For example, on same-sex marriage, which is not an issue that is going to come up, not an issue that will be legislated on, but how would you have voted, she is asked, and she was honest. She just said, I would have voted against. And all of a sudden, supporters back off. Now, I can't even begin to describe the level of vitriol and hatred, not just on Twitter, that has been applied to that poor woman. It is enormously upsetting, incredibly intolerant. Let me read you this. This is from Dr. Charlotte Proudman, and someone who apparently has a great following, and I think she's based down in England. This is what she says. Kate Forbes is standing to be the next leader of Scotland. She's anti-gay marriage and anti-abortion. There is no place for these views in a progressive Scotland or UK or world. Sorry, Kate, you're about 80 years too late to politics with these views. Now, here's an irony, isn't it? Politicians and commentators talk about Scotland's diversity and tolerance whilst leading a witch hunt, which it is, against a woman who does not share all their social views and demanding that there be no place for her or any who think like her. So that's people like me. It's at least a third of the people in Scotland, if not more. If you're a Catholic who believes what your church teaches, if you're I was going to say an Anglican, but who knows. If you're a Protestant, if you're an evangelical, there is no place for you in Scotland. There's a place for rapists who say that they are women to go into women's prisons, but there's no place for Kate Forbes as a leader of the people in Scotland. Now, I want you to listen to this. This is the interview. I was really upset about this. I was praying this morning and the phone rang. And it was a producer from the BBC, The World Tonight programme, asking would I be prepared to go on. And after we talked, she went to speak to her boss, and I thought, they're not going to let me on because of my views. But to be fair to them, they did. And we had this interview. So enjoy this, and I'll return.
Last night on the programme, we discussed the often awkward mix of religion and politics. Our conversation was prompted by the fact that the Scottish Finance Minister, Kate Forbes, had decided to join the contest to be the next leader of the SNP. Ms Forbes is a member of the Evangelical Free Church of Scotland, and she said that she would have voted against gay marriage laws. She's also said that having children outside of marriage is wrong according to her faith. But since she made those comments, a number of high-profile backers have withdrawn their support for her, and there's speculation that her campaign may be over before it's ever even really begun. Others, though, continue to back her. Just before we came on air, Nicola Sturgeon was asked whether she thought the party was tearing itself apart.
Internal democracy, just as is the case for country democracy, debate is important, and the SNP has many times been accused, wrongly in my view, of not embracing debate on issues. So we're perhaps seeing the opposite of that right now. People look to the SNP as the government of Scotland to be very clear in its values about the kind of Scotland we are. Fair, inclusive, open, tolerant country. And also people look to the SNP and how we conduct ourselves to make judgments about what an independent Scotland would look like. And I think that's a responsibility people in the SNP carry.
I'm joined now by David Robertson, a former moderator of the Free Church of Scotland, who's now working for Sydney Anglicans in Australia. Good morning, I think I should be saying to you, David Robertson.
Yeah, good morning. Nice to talk to you. I'm talking to you recovering from COVID, so please forgive me if my voice is not that great.
Well, thank you very much for speaking to us. Kate Forbes has made it plain that she's simply expressing her religious views. There's clearly been a very strong reaction to that. She says it won't affect legislation that's already been passed. What do you make of the reaction to her openness, let's call it that?
Yeah, I think the more interesting thing here is that she wasn't standing up and saying these things. She was being asked them. And she's being asked them continually by journalists and I think prompted by the establishment, shall I put it, within the SNP, who are horrified at the prospect of her replacing Nicola Sturgeon. So she basically gets asked gotcha questions. And unlike many Christians in the UK today in politics feel they have to avoid, she'd been advised to lie. And she said, no, I'll just be honest.
Well,
and what she...
But what are they horrified by? Are they horrified by the fact that they see her as illiberal? Are they horrified by the fact that they feel she may threaten the established order? What is it that you think they're horrified by? After all, many people thought she was the front runner.
Yeah, it's the latter. And well, she is the front runner, and that's why they've gone for her with such viciousness. I mean, I don't know if you've been following, but it's even Joanna Cherry has been forced to say, look, call off the hounds. It really is quite ridiculous. They're horrified at the prospect of the establishment having gone, but they're not horrified at her being illiberal. There is no one more illiberal, I think, in the UK at the moment than the Scottish government. I mean, the person whom people now expect to be elected, Humza Yousaf, passed hate crime laws, which, amongst other things, meant that parents could be penalised for what they said at their kitchen table to their own kids.
But that's a narrow political point, and people will argue over that. But the politics here is about her religious views. Are you surprised that in a sense she didn't have to choose to be so open about her religious views? She could have dodged these questions. She could have answered them differently.
Well, she could have lied and she could have dodged them and they would have persisted because every single person knew. Now, the MSPs who are withdrawing from her at this moment are doing so out of sheer cowardness, not because they've suddenly realised her views. They know our church, they know what we teach. By the way, we teach the same as the Catholic Church and as the Muslims. I'm intrigued that nobody has asked Humza Yousaf about the Quran or some of the passages in it. And incidentally, none of them have asked him about what his personal views are on same-sex marriage.
He was asked about his views on faith, I think, by a BBC reporter yesterday. And so those questions have come up, and no doubt that they will now, I imagine, come up again. But do you think then, Kate Forbes, it will become impossible for her to stand as leader, given that these views, these chasms have opened up on these specific issues?
No. I think, first of all, let me just go back a little bit. Humza Yousaf was asked about faith in general, and he said it didn't affect his policies, which if the journalist had pushed on that, doesn't make any sense at all. But you could ask about specific things. Kate Forbes is being asked about every specific detail about social liberal policies that that people don't agree with her views. She's not being asked about poverty, which for me is a much more important issue, or independence, or the NHS.
But
why is that the case? Because they're trying to get her. So I think that we've got an irony here. The National, which is the kind of Pravda of the SNP newspaper, is running a poll at the moment, which I think they're beginning to regret, because every day, in fact, every hour, they've run an anti-Kate Forbes piece. And yet, despite that, asking SNP supporters, who would you vote for? Humza Yousaf, 19%, Reagan, 44%, and Forbes, 36%.
So you think this is about her...
If Forbes holds on until the debates, she'll win.
You think this is about her popularity, but what do you say to those who'd argue it's simply that the party believes that her views are out of step with mainstream public opinion?
Well, you see, the trouble is, you're right using the phrase the party. What the party says is true. It is extremely Orwellian. I don't think that I think we keep getting told what mainstream public opinion is.
Okay.
And I want to know who determines that opinion. I personally think that most people admire a politician who's willing to speak the truth. See, the point is here, we're arguing about an issue, same-sex marriage, which is not going to come up for debate. And we're ignoring issues like the failure of the NHS, which Humza Yousaf is currently in charge of,
all right,
which is in reality right now. And it seems to me that this is absolutely an anti-Christian getcha. And if she is forced out, then I would suggest this is a sign of an illiberal, intolerant society, not of a tolerant society.
David Robertson, former moderator of the Free Church of Scotland, thank you very much. Let's speak to someone now.
Okay, so I don't know what you think about that. There's aspects of it that for me were really disappointing. You do an interview live and you always think what you could have said or done better. But it's not about me. I want you to think of these things we discussed there. High-profile backers withdrawing. Why are they withdrawing? They're not withdrawing because these views are new to them. They're withdrawing because of the mob pressure that's put on them. That's the level of politician that we have in Scotland today. Another key point in that interview was the question of liberalism. This is not liberalism, as I showed you in the quote beforehand. There is no place for you in Scotland. There's no place for you in the UK. There's no place for you in the world. That's supposed to be liberalism. It's interesting that the interviewer suggested that the point about Humza Yousaf's crime laws was a narrow political point. No. Asking about a non-existent vote, a hypothetical vote on same-sex marriage, is a narrow political, personal point. Asking about hate crime laws, which would put people like Kate Forbes in prison or me in prison, is not a hypothetical point. Let me quote something. I believe that a trans woman is a biological male who identifies as a woman. For saying that in an interview, Kate Forbes has been reported to the NEC of the Scottish National Party. Under Yousaf's hate crime laws, you could be prosecuted for that. Can you believe that a candidate for a political post in Scotland is being reported for transphobia for saying a biological, logical fact that a trans woman is a biological male, isn't that true, who identifies as a woman, isn't that true? But to say truth is now considered hate crime. And then there's the other thing about asking Humza. You see, the interviewer said, oh, no, he was asked. No, he wasn't. He was asked about faith in general. And he said, my faith doesn't affect my politics. First of all, I don't believe that. And secondly, the interviewer should have pressed him a bit. For example, the interviewer could have said, do you accept that the Quran is the word of God? Now, Humza Yousaf will have to say yes, or he'll upset all his Muslim friends and family. And if he says yes, the journalist, and this is what would happen, by the way, to a Christian, says, well, do you accept what the Quran says about domestic violence or polygamy or various other things that don't seem to quite fit with modern society? But of course they won't do that. Why? Because that would be deemed Islamophobic, and Islamophobia is a crime, whereas being Christophobic, that's the rule now. That's what you have to do. This is fundamentally anti-Christian. So I'm going to leave it there, but there's a lot more to say about it. Most of all, I want you to pray for Kate. If you're not a Christian, you're not someone who prays, a lot of atheists and secularists have been in touch saying, this is horrendous. In fact, one guy says, this is hellish. And I said, you have no idea how true that is. This is hellish. Personally, I hope she's going to be able to stay in and to debate, because I think she will win the debates hands down. Personally, I fear for my country, and I fear about even being permitted to return to it. How did Scotland become so illiberal, so authoritarian, so intolerant? Personally, I'm disgusted at politicians who either don't think or back out because, so many have been saying, well, if she was wise, she would just have lied. Really? That's where we're at. You wonder why we don't trust you if you're a politician? I'm thankful for those who do speak up. I hope there will be others who do so. Pray for Kate. Pray for my poor, beloved Scotland. How did we get to this? Honestly, how did we get to this? Lord, have mercy upon us. I said I was going to finish, but this is what I read this morning, which was real encouragement. This is Jesus, Luke 9:23. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life from me will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit their very self? Whoever is ashamed of me and my words, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his glory and in the glory of the Father and of the holy angels. Those of you who profess to be Christian and are ashamed of the words of Christ and ashamed of his Bible, you have a day coming. And it's a day of judgment before God, not the people. And Kate Forbes and others like you who have been faithful to what Christ says, he's not going to be ashamed of you in any sense whatsoever. God bless you wherever you are. Fight the good fight. Don't despair. There's kingdoms rise, kingdoms fall, but the word of our God endures forever. Bye.